So we have a go ahead to start the session. Let's begin with the first paper. It's by Ritam and Urmila. It's called Indigenous Introspection, Navigating Post-Memory in Theodore Fontaine's Broken Circle.
The title of our paper is Indigenous Introspection, Navigating Post-Memory in Theodore Fontaine's Broken Circle. Due to time crunch, we had to keep this presentation short and precise. Yeah, please move to the second page. So we have found a significant amount of evidence in literature that children are being sent away to boarding schools, sometimes as punishment, and the other experience feelings of abandonment and betrayal by their parents. Boarding schools are often portrayed as strict and hostile environments, exacerbating feelings of loneliness and isolation, though it raises questions about the effectiveness and ethics of using separation as discipline. This narrative underscores the complexity of parent-child relationships as well. Children face challenges coping with academic and social pressures without familial support. Overall, the portrayal sheds light on the consequences of such disciplinary actions in literature. Such as in Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, the protagonist Jane is punished by her aunt and sent to a strict boarding school. There she endures deprivation and mistreatment, facing the harsh realities of a Spartan education. Bronte's novel illustrates the emotional and psychological impact of such punitive measures, exploring themes of isolation, adversity, and the search for identity. Also, in movie like Tare Zameen Par, directed by Aamir Khan, depicts the challenges of children in the education system, focusing on dyslexic Ishan Awasthe's struggles. It highlights the emotional turmoil of the children marginalized in school due to the learning difficulties and differences. The film also addresses the negative impact of boarding schools, especially as punishment for children. Can you please move on to the third slide? The Canadian-Indian residential school system, rooted in colonialism and Eurocentric ideologies, aimed to assimilate indigenous pupils into the Euro-Canadian society. This school system amounted to cultural genocide. A renewed interest in residential schools emerged in the early 19th century, fueled by the decline in military hostility towards settlers. Operated for over a century, the residence school system forcibly separated indigenous children from their families and communities. The system's goal was to convert indigenous children to Christianity and acculturate them into Euro-Canadian society, contributing to the displacement and cultural erasure of indigenous communities. Students in the Canadian residential school system endured widespread abuses, including sexual and physical assault, malnourishment, and harsh discipline. Overcrowding, poor sanitization, and inadequate healthcare contribute to high rates of disease and death toll among students. Until the late 1950s, schools were severely underfunded and relied on forced student labor. The legacy of the residential school system continues to be felt today with ongoing effort towards truth, reconciliation, and healing for indigenous peoples in Canada. Mistreatment of students was documented by government officials and survivors seeking compensation. Investigations and memoirs in 1990s revealed severe abuse by school staff and older students. Indigenous activism led to greater public awarenesses, government apologies, and legal settlements, highlighting the system's legacy of abuse and trauma. Moving on to the next slide. Theodore Fontaine, also known as Phil Fontaine, is relevant on this topic of the Canadian Indian residential school system due to his first-hand experience as a survivor of these institutions, notably the Fort Alexander Indian Residential School in Manitoba. His memoir, Broken Circle, The Dark Legacy of Indian Residential Schools, provides valuable insight into the history and legacy of residential schools. Additionally, Fontaine's advocacy work and leadership in addressing the intergenerational impacts of residential schools make him a significant figure in discussing surrounding Indigenous rights and historical injustices. Moving on to the next slide. In Broken Circle, a memoir, Theodore Fontaine vividly recounts the trauma of the residential school system, shedding light on the systematic injustices and enduring legacy of historical trauma endured by Indigenous children through his personal narrative. Fontaine's account resonates with experiences of students at the Fort Alexander Indian Residential School, such as outdoor activities which are mandatory regardless of weather conditions. Despite extreme temperatures and inclement weather, students were compelled to endure outdoor exposures, exacerbating the physical and emotional toll on their well-being. Also, Fontaine describes how the environment of guilt and manipulation perpetuated at the school contribute to the own tendencies to manipulate and guilt-trip others, even after leaving the institutions. Then the mention of Nan attributing a child's death to his cousin's perceived bad behavior highlights the psychological abuse inflicted upon students, instilling a sense of responsibility and guilt for events beyond their control. Fontaine's tendency to transfer his feelings of guilt and self-blame onto his parents underscores a profound psychological impact of residential schools on Indigenous families. These are the only few of examples of them from Fontaine's recollection of his memoirs. Now over to my co-author.
Thank you, Urmila. Can I have the next slide, please? So, Theodore Fontaine's family relationship in his memoir, Broken Circle, are deeply affected by the forced separation he experienced when his parents were compelled to leave him at an Indian residential school. Fontaine lost his family and freedom at the age of 7, and the trauma of his separation left the feeling of abandoned and confused. The memoir explores the impact of this separation on his emotional, psychological, and spiritual well-being, as well as the loss of the language and culture. Fontaine's parents believed that sending him to residential school would help him assimilate into white culture. But the sum total of their efforts actually damaged his mind and nearly destroyed his identity. Fontaine's portrayal of guilt as a complex emotion that he experienced in relation to his family and his own actions. He also felt guilt for having his parents and for not being able to protect his younger sibling from the same fate. Later in his life, Fontaine struggled with addiction and abusive behavior, which he attributed in part of the trauma of residential school. He felt guilty for the harm he caused to himself and others, but he also recognized that he was a victim of a system that was designed to destroy indigenous cultures and identities. Through his journey of healing and reconciliation, Fontaine learned to forgive himself and others, and he found a sense of peace and purpose in sharing his stories. Now over to the next slide. The idea of post-memory, as coined by Marian Hirsch, refers to the emotional and psychological impact of traumatic events that are transferred across generations. Unlike memory, which involves first-hand experiences, post-memory involves a second-generation experience of events, often inherited from family members who directly lived through the trauma. He initially explored this concept in the context of Holocaust survivors and their descendants, but it has since been applied to various historical traumas. Post-memory involves a complex interplay between the personal and the collective, shaping the identity and the consciousness of those who did not directly experience the events. It highlights how the memories of the past are not confined to the individual who lived through them, but extend to subsequent generations, influencing their perspective, emotions, and self of self. Now, let's move to the next slide. Because of the time crunch, I will provide just 2 examples to briefly discuss this concept. There's a unique aspect that can only be understood through post-memory. Fontaine witnessed his cousins Maria undergo a similar school experience, creating a sense of post-memory even before facing his own challenges. Maria filed an abuse claim against the federal government and the Roman Catholic Church, leading Fontaine to appear visibly upset, angry, tear-stained, expressing her desire to go home. This shared experience further contributed to the post-memory woven into Fontaine's understanding of the traumatic event. Another significant experience involves the stories Fontaine's mother shared about her time at residential school, where the institution tried to impose Catholicism and erase her indigenous identity. These memories became a more significant issue as Fontaine revisited them after a long time. The alienation from his mother's Indian heritage and family due to the church and the school reflects the disruptive impact of historical trauma on familial connections. This narrative aligns with post-memorial framework, illustrating how institutional force disrupted familial bonds and distorted connections to indigenous heritage. Through these examples, we can understand how, despite facing traumas, Fontaine was always aware of them, which eventually manifested in the form of post-memory. So the last slide, which is the final thoughts, Fontaine was a stark reminder of the lasting scares caused by residential school separation. We must approach the idea of sending children to boarding school with caution, ensuring it's never done as a form of punishment. The narrative highlights the profound impact on emotional well-being and familial connections, urging us to prioritize empathy and understanding over punitive measures in education. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ritam and Urmila. We'll come back to your paper. It raised quite a few important issues. So we'll quickly go to Riddhima. Riddhima is talking from a completely different location, and her title is called The Neglected Past, Indigenous Women of India and Their Melodies of Farming.
Before I start, I would like to say a few words. Comparative literature from the very first day has taught me to explore the so-called offbeat paths of, say, literature, music, culture, or the world. I'm really grateful to my professors and the scholars of my department, Jadavpur University Comparative Literature, to instill in me enough sensibility to be sensible and empathetic, not towards, but with my fellow people. And I'm also grateful to this department that I am here today speaking. The indigenous people who have resided in this land since time immemorial regrettably face discriminations from the Aryan conquerors within their own homeland. This scenario evokes the tale of Gregor Samsa, who woke one morning transformed into a colossal insect, becoming an unwelcome burden to his own kin. The mistreatment of the indigenous communities is not confined to a particular area, but rather a widespread occurrence worldwide. We anxiously wait for the subalterns to speak, much like Vladimir and Aragon's anticipation for Godot's arrival. The Brahminical society has consistently chosen to disregard and dismiss narratives that hold great significance for these individuals, resulting in a collective forgetfulness that is now perceived as cultural amnesia. In the past, both men and women coexisted in hunter-gatherer societies where resources and power were fairly distributed. These societies did not adhere to concepts such as private ownership, social hierarchies, state institutions, or subjugation of women. Engels referred to these societies as primitive communism due to their communal nature. Men primarily focused on hunting, while women took charge of gathering and maintaining the household, which was viewed as collective effort. However, it is important to recognize that women actively participated in collective work, and their role in gathering played a crucial role in providing sustenance for the entire group. The emergence of agricultural practices was greatly influenced by the act of gathering. The discovery of agriculture by women in India around 9000 BCE holds significant recognition in various academic disciplines, such as history, anthropology, sociology, and agricultural science. These exceptional women, fueled by their unwavering determination and keen observation skills, successfully unraveled the enigma of life sprouting from seeds. Their primary objective was to ensure a consistent and reliable food supply for their communities. Anthropologists, including E.M. Loeb, 1960, have explored two potential methods of initiating cultivation, through seeds and roots. However, it is these women who rightfully deserve credit for their ingenious inventions in both cases. As the cultivation of food crops expanded from small plots to vast lands, it marked a momentous turning point in the course of history. The tireless endeavors of these women, driven by affection and dedication, promptly commenced to support families and shape novel societies. The advent of the Aryans in India, which occurred much later between 1800 to 1500 BCE, appears insignificant in comparison. Hence, based on the available evidence, it can be confidently inferred that it was the native women who pioneered agriculture. This fundamental aspect of human survival, the provision of sustenance, stands as a testament to their invaluable contribution. It not only nourishes individuals, families, and entire nations, but also fulfills the most basic human needs for nourishment. Without the resourcefulness and unwavering commitment of these women, supermarket shelves would be devoid of produce, and the persistent threat of hunger would loom over all of us. Considering the vast diversity and intricate nature of India, delving into a specific literary or cultural system without acknowledging its interconnectedness with other similar systems become impractical. Our objective here is to establish a comparative connection among these systems while maintaining our focus on the topic at hand. The forthcoming paper will explore the point of convergence between indigenous, Brahminical, and Tamil literary and cultural systems, considering their diverse characteristics. This article delves into the deep connection that exists between the concept of indigenous and women. Ancient scriptures, such as Puranas, shed light on the existence of goddess Kali since time immemorial. The term Kali originates from Kal, representing the essence of time. Hence, the goddess Kali is revered in a naked form, as time cannot be veiled by mere garments. It is firmly believed that the divine mother goddess encompasses the entirety of the world within her being and has bestowed life upon both the natural world and the mortal beings. Additionally, the Kalika Purana portrays goddess Kali as an indigenous figure with dark skin and an untamed appearance. The depiction of her in the Kalika Purana is described as Deepi Charma Paridhana Shushka Mangshati Bhairava Ati Bistara Vadana Jubha Lalana Bhishana Nimagna Arakta Nayana Nada Parita Dingmukha. She possesses a slender physique that emanates fragility, adorned with a tiger skin draped around her waist. Her countenance is dominated by a wide mouth, seemingly capable of devouring anything in its path. With her tongue protruding in a display of insatiable hunger, her emaciated abdomen further accentuates her predatory appearance. Her eyes, tinged with a fiery red hue, contribute to her fierce and untamed demeanor.
Although the Puranas were written much later, but the Sanskrit word Adi associated with women and indigenous signifies the first. Consequently, it becomes evident that these texts are not linked to the indigenous realm, but rather serve as testament to the political agenda of the Brahminical literary system. The system aims to establish the indigenous figure as an Aryan goddess, strategically asserting Brahminical contribution to the Indian society and claiming ownership over anything ancient. Paradoxically, while we worship the indigenous figure Kali, we remain oblivious to the plight of the indigenous masses, continuously marginalizing them without remorse. This duality exemplifies the complex nature and duality of the Indian society. This research paper aims to delve into the intricate lives and heartfelt emotions of indigenous Indian women by closely examining their songs, particularly those associated with agriculture, which have been unearthed from their collective memories. These songs eloquently depict various aspects of life, however, given the immense depth of diversity of Indian culture and musical heritage, attempting to encompass it all within a single document would be an overwhelming endeavor. Therefore, our focus will be centered on the captivating state of West Bengal. These indigenous women of Bengal have a rich tradition of performing songs that resonate with various cultures across the globe. These songs, which have been mentioned in ancient texts, encapsulates a plethora of experiences from everyday life. However, the educated Bengali society has displayed minimal interest in delving deeper into the exploration of and study of these songs. Chandra Mukhopadhyay, an enthusiastic independent researcher, astutely highlights that the riverside region of Bengal is adorned with enchanting melodies composed by the countless women of the villages. In 1920s, Gauripur Rajnandini Srimati Nihar Borua emerged as a trailblazer in collecting folk songs with specific emphasis on women's song. Despite the limited interest at the time, she tirelessly gathered songs during her tours. The songs mentioned in this document are derived from these collections, which have been made accessible through Chandra Mukhopadhyay's YouTube channel, Gidali. In regards to the discourse, Vidyadhar Mahato, Karamveer Mahato from Purulia expressed the belief held by their forefathers that chup diya dhan ruile dhan bodbotai jabe. The conviction underlying this belief arises from the concept that the melodies performed by the young women possesses a distinct influence capable of augmenting the productivity of rice saplings and guaranteeing their development. Now let us delve into the verses and their interpretation. মরিচ খাবি মিষ্টি পাবিলো তুই মরবিলো ঝালে ওই যে বহুত দিনের ভালোবাসা বন্ধু ভুলবো কেমনে You will find sweetness in chili, but you will surely die because of the spice. Oh, that long-lost love, it aches. How will I forget, my friend? This is a song from Purulia. ও চাদরে কি মশা যায় মশারু না হলে পর কখনো কি খেদ মেটায় কোলের স্বামী না হলে Can ever a blanket ripple mosquitoes like a mosquito net? Can anyone except my met quench the hunger of my soul? চলগো মাসি চলগো পিসি চল যাবো ধান লড়াইতে শ্বশুর ঘরের গুণের কথা বইলবো আরে বসে Come aunties, let us go to the paddy field and sow the seeds and gather to have a juicy chat about my in-laws. The transmission of these songs from one generation to another through oral tradition serves as a collective memory for the native women of Bengal. The lyric of these songs not only encompasses the intricate emotions, but also becomes the songs of labor. This melodies beautifully captures the essence of daily tasks and heartfelt emotions experienced by these women, ranging from longing for loved ones to gossip about in-laws. They eloquently convey their feelings of love, anger, pain, longing, shedding light on the complex realities of their lives. Unapologetically candid, the lyrics often delve into the matters of sexuality. Also, the relationship between women and nature in Tamil Akam poems is intricate and diverse. These poems utilize the natural world as a symbol of language to portray the inner emotions of female characters. Each of the 5 thenais, mountain, forest, field, coast, and desert, is associated with specific emotional states such as unity, longing, anger, yearning, detachment, respectively. As academics, it is our responsibility to continue discussing this matter until the masses overcome their state of denial. We have a duty to advocate for the preservation of nature, indigenous communities for their vibrant cultures, their melodious songs, and their impactful protests, as all of these are in the verge of extinction. This could potentially label us as Gonoshotru, the enemy of the people, as the government systematically instills in us the drugs of forgetfulness and complacency. Once we settle into our comfort zones, our progress halts, and our spirits become tainted. Nevertheless, we must ensure that the conversations never ceases. Can you envision a world where every remnant of the past is gradually erased? Cultural landmarks such as Tibetan eateries, souvenir shops, and places of worship are vanishing. It seems as though there is nothing left to remind us of our origins and legacy. Instead, we find ourselves surrounded by a sea of novelty that lacks any connection to the history or sentimentality. It prompts us to ponder, Quo vadis, where are we headed? Are we destined for a future devoid of substance and significance? Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for sticking to the time. So we'll open up, and before that, we have to see two things which have come up in these papers, and both are somewhat, talking about two things, right? One is memory and how it passes. So in one case, post-memory is applicable both to Canadian literature, it is applicable to what I am doing my work on right now, right? Because post-memory leads to a certain kind of identity crisis, it leads to a certain kind of identity creation. And in the case of your paper, where you were talking about post-memory and how it is like a movement from the personal to the collective. And then she talked about a collective memory, right? And how that is somewhat helping in sustaining and an entire tradition to survive. So that's it. I think obviously understanding the residential school system is extremely important in order to understand Canadian literature, and this is somewhat something, taking up from what Professor Chattopadhyay said in the morning. So it was almost like a continuation of that, and I hope that people who will be taking up Canadian literature over here, they'll be looking into the author you have mentioned. So let us open, and I think we have 10 minutes, so we can take some questions.
It has to do with this, with what you said about residential school system. I don't know if this has been done. I've always had this thought, maybe it's a curiosity. I've always wondered from where the English got this idea of setting up residential schools in Canada. And I suspect that it goes back to the 6th, 7th centuries in England, and the way in which they would have evolved school system, boarding system, and maybe later into the 19th century, of course, we have the daddy of Matthew Arnold setting up the boarding school. So I've always wondered about this. You'll have to correct me if there is possibly some kind of a connection. They're taking off something from that system onto Canada. I don't know. I don't know if you have thought about that, Sujorita. But this is something that has always kind of bugged me in a way.
Denotified tribes in India and working with 12 communities here in West Bengal in the Lodha Shabur areas. There were demands, and so our state is actually now constructing residential school system for our people again. And the thing is residential slash boarding schools where the Lodha women, they put their kids and they have to pay also for the electricity bill, etc. And they go for work, which means collecting June grass. June grass is like we use the broomstick that we use in Bengal, so they cut those grasses in the morning and then they come back. Because this is primarily done to protect the children from alcoholism that is there at home, because men take away the money. But worst is when I revisited those again, those villages in 2021, I found the increasing number of women who have become alcoholic. In Okarboyd, Bangthupi, these are the areas. These are also the areas where Khedia Shabor people, they have taken up organic farming. They were accused of non-settler nomadic tribes, but these were the people who had actually moved to several parts of India before the lockdown. So when they came back, there were no facilities for quarantine, and the entire Khedia Shabor community faced this tremendous threat of contamination. So very interestingly, all these issues have been coming up, that what is the act of translation in these communities, because most of the COVID related literature were in English or other dominant Indian languages. So how do you take this literature into these communities to educate people? There were lots of things being done, especially by these two important organizations set up by Mahashweta Devi, Khedia Shabor Unnayan Samiti. It was already in place before Mahashweta Devi went. And of course, she definitely instilled more faith and more, I would say, public attention, drew public attention, and these became two important organizations who are working for the people. But then there is this demand for residential school system, which is quite alarming for me. Another important thing is that when I started working with the Purulia-based tribe, not the Dhekarus, but I'm just forgetting the name. There are only 352 speakers. They were given this opportunity to relocate into government constructed housings. Now they don't live in those, so they think that this is not the way they construct houses. So they have adopted animals, and their cows and sheep are there in that house, but they are still living in their this is the name of the tribe is Bidhor. So another Austroasiatic group, which is compared with our, can be compared with our Santals. That's the similar language that they speak. But there is whole lot of illiteracy, and there were survivors of tuberculosis even in 2014 here. So you can understand the complex wave into which we are adopting things which are residual elements of again our colonial memory, that in 2012-14 people were demanding for this to come out of a system which they are not aware of, that what would mean, like putting their children back to schools, because the language that they are learning in this residential school system are very different from what they speak at home. Same thing what Sucharita Di was talking about. For example, Aam in Bangla means completely different to Aam what is in Shamtali. Is Anita here? No. So just imagine the cultural, I would say, dislocatedness of the people, kids who are going to a school which is treating them or trying to assimilate them. And when they're coming back home, it's a different language altogether. So we are talking about colonialism, we are talking about undoing that, and it is happening right now. So responding to you, sorry.
No, I think what it says is that we always have to look at our own homes before we look elsewhere. I just want to add that, yeah.
We have about 2 more minutes if anyone has a question.
Hi, this is Suparna Mandal, PhD Research Scholar, Center for Comparative Literature. I have a question for Riddhima. So you mentioned Chandra Mukhopadhyay. So I have seen some of her videos. So what she does is she sings the songs herself, collects the songs and sings the songs herself. So how do you address the politics of archiving in this? Because instead of recording the songs from the women who are like singing songs or composing them, she is just collecting them and singing them herself. So how do you address the politics of archiving in this process?
So few months back, I attended a conference by Chandra Mukhopadhyay herself. So the point of her establishing her YouTube channel is all about surviving the melodies that are there in the songs, because the songs that I mentioned in my paper as well, these were all archived, the lyrics were archived by Nihar Borua, and long back, the women of these villages have stopped singing this song nowadays. So the next generations have also forgotten some of the melodies, so we cannot find them and like record them singing it. And also there is a very important thing which is there and which is not connecting the as like a bridge, is the time of the farmers and the women in the villages. They seldom get time to like sing and like show their livelihood to the archivers. So the main purpose of Chandra Mukhopadhyay doing the things in Gidali is just to survive the melodies that are there, and the original lyrics are there in the archives, which were maintained by Hemango Biswas, Khaled Choudhury, and Srimati Nihar Borua.
If anyone doesn't have any more questions, then I think we will close for the day. So thank you so much, everyone. I'll just hand over the mic to Ankona. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next session is the Lee Maracle Memorial Lecture, which will be delivered by Kolampa Bob and Tanya Carter. It will be held on an online mode over Google Meet from IST. Leave now. Let us all meet again at 8 p.m. The link for joining is available in the